Phoenix in October is still hot enough to fool you into thinking summer never left, and the freezer bays at the county medical examiner's office ran cold enough to make your teeth hurt after 10 minutes. I liked that contrast. It gave me something to think about while I worked. That morning I had 3 cases lined up, and the second one was the one that stuck. He came in on a Tuesday. Male, listed as 58, found unresponsive in a room at one of those long-stay motels off I-17, the kind with a pool nobody swims in. Paramedics called it. The report on my desk said, probable cardiac event, no obvious trauma, no drug paraphernalia in the room. The kind of case that usually takes me an hour and a half and closes itself. I remember the coffee that morning was burnt. Marisol at the front desk had left the pot on since 6. She apologized when I came in that half-laughing way she did, and I told her I didn't mind. I drank it anyway. That detail stays with me for some reason. Burnt coffee, the hum of the fluorescents, the smell of the disinfectant they'd switched to that summer. Something floral that was supposed to be less harsh, but just made the room smell like a funeral home. I pulled him out of the drawer at 9:40, signed the intake sheet, checked the tag on his right toe, name printed clean, block letters, black marker, date of birth, case number, all in order. I said his first name out loud, the way I always do, more habit than ritual. It just feels wrong to open somebody up without at least addressing them once. He was in decent shape for 58, no visible scars, no tattoos, nails trimmed, palms soft, not a guy who worked with his hands. There was a small mole under his left ear I noted for the report. I put my hand on his chest for the standard external, and the first thing I noticed was that his heart wasn't where it should be. I don't mean it was gone. I mean, when I pressed down over the left side, I got the give you'd expect from lung tissue underneath. When I moved my hand across to the right of the sternum, there was a firmer resistance, the kind you feel when you're over a heart. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds with my palm on his chest, doing the checks in my head. I've been doing this job for almost 15 years. You get a feel for anatomy the way a mechanic gets a feel for engines. I did the Y incision, opened him up. Everything was flipped, situs inversus, full mirror. Heart on the right, liver on the left, spleen on the right. The whole layout reflected like somebody had taken a diagram and traced it upside down. It's rare, but it happens. Maybe 1 in 10,000. Most people who have it live their whole lives without knowing. I'd only seen it twice before, once in med school, and once about 6 years back. It doesn't kill you. It isn't the story. The story is what happened next. I was talking myself through it on the recorder, the way I do, describing the layout, noting that the heart looked enlarged, and there was clear ischemic damage on the wall of the left ventricle, which on this guy was on the right, consistent with the cause of death listed. So far, so normal, just an interesting anatomy note for the file. Then I stopped the recorder. I don't know why. Something about the way his face looked when I glanced up at it. I'd been working for maybe 40 minutes, and I'd been standing to his left the entire time. So I was looking at his profile, and I just had this small itch in the back of my head that I'd seen that face somewhere. Not personally, somewhere in paperwork, somewhere recent. I stepped back from the table, peeled off my outer gloves, and walked over to the intake file. Read the name on the toe tag again, read the name on the paperwork. They matched. Of course they matched. They'd matched an hour ago when I checked. I pulled up the county system on the workstation in the corner, typed the name in, date of birth, hit search, and that's where it got strange. There was a match. Same name, same date of birth, an address on Aztec Street, up in Sunny Slope. Driver's license photo pulled up on the screen, except the guy in the photo wasn't the guy on my table, not even close. The photo showed a heavier man, maybe 230 pounds, olive skin, hair going gray at the temples. The man in front of me was lean, pale, and looked 10 years older. I'll admit my first thought was clerical. Paperwork gets crossed all the time. 2 guys with the same name, one dies, somebody at intake grabs the wrong file. It happens more often than the public would like to know. So I called dispatch and asked for the officer who'd brought the body in. Got him on the line about 20 minutes later. I asked him where the tag had come from. He said the tag was made at the motel, based on ID found in the room. Wallet on the nightstand, driver's license, one credit card, a photo of 2 kids. Everything in the wallet said the same name. He read it back to me. It matched. I asked him if he'd taken a photo of the license. He had. He sent it over. The face on the license was the heavier guy, the same guy in the DMV system, not the man on my table. I sat there for a while with my hand on the mouse, the hum of the fluorescence, the floral disinfectant, the body 20 feet away with his chest still open under the sheet I'd pulled up. I called the detective on the case. His name was Ray, or that's what everybody called him. I never learned if it was short for something. Older guy, close to retirement. The kind who'd seen enough that not much shook him. I told him the license photo and the body didn't match. I told him about the wallet, about the tag, about the mirror-flipped organs, because I felt like I had to mention it, even though I couldn't say why it mattered. Ray was quiet for a beat. Then he said, "I'll go knock on the address." He called me back 4 hours later. His voice sounded different on the second call. Not scared, just quiet. Like he'd been thinking the whole drive back and hadn't come out of it yet. The guy on the license was alive, sitting in his kitchen in Sunny Slope, drinking a beer, watching a Cardinals game on mute. He'd let Ray in without asking many questions, answered everything. His wallet was on the counter, right where he'd left it that morning. Driver's license inside, credit card, the photo of the 2 kids. Ray checked. All of it real. All of it his. He'd called his mother in Tucson the night before, around 7, just to check in. She confirmed the call. Phone records confirmed the call. He was healthy. He was home. He had never been to that motel in his life, which meant somebody had made a tag with his name on it, put it in a wallet that looked exactly like his, dropped that wallet next to a dead man in a motel off I-17, and walked away. And that dead man happened to have his organs on the wrong side of his body, which is a thing you would only know if you'd already seen inside him. That last part is what stayed with me the longest. The tag was made before anyone opened him up. Whoever made the tag didn't know about the anatomy. That was a coincidence. A 1 in 10,000 coincidence, sitting on my table, dressed in another man's name. We ran prints, nothing came back. Ran him through missing persons in 3 states, nothing. Dental didn't hit either, and his teeth were in good enough shape that they should have hit something if he'd ever seen a dentist in the country. Ray kept the case open for a while. I know he interviewed the motel staff, the housekeeper who found him, the guy at the front desk. Nobody remembered him checking in. The room had been paid in cash a week earlier, under a name that turned out to be fake. The chain lock had been latched from the inside. The housekeeper only got in because a maintenance guy pulled the pin out of the bracket. The living guy on the license, the one in Sunny Slope, got a new license issued as a precaution, changed the locks on his house. I don't know what else he did. Ray told me he seemed rattled but not scared, just confused. Kept asking why. Ray didn't have an answer. The body sat in our cooler for close to 11 months while they tried to find someone to claim him. Nobody did. In September of 2020, he was buried at the county cemetery under the marker they use for unknowns. A case number, a year, and the 2 words. That was all. I still work in the same building. I still drink Marisol's coffee, and it's still usually burnt. I've done maybe 300 autopsies since that one. None of them have surprised me the same way. What sticks with me is the guy in Sunny Slope. He's fine. He kept living his life. He probably still is. He has no idea that someone, somewhere, went to the trouble of building a version of him that ended up dead in a motel room in Phoenix in October. And whoever did it, they did it and left. They didn't stay. They didn't come back to check. They wanted, for a few hours at least, for that name to belong to a body on my table. Ray retired the next spring. He asked me once over a beer if I ever thought about it. I said I did. He said, "Yeah, me too." Then he changed the subject. The first time Doreen spoke that language, I was standing in the doorway of her room with a cup of ice chips, and I honestly thought she was on a phone call. She wasn't. She didn't own a phone. Nobody else was in there with her. I'd been volunteering at a hospice above Mission Valley since November, mostly because my aunt died in a place like it and I never got to sit with her at the end. Volunteers didn't do medical work. We read to people, held their hands, sat in the room so nobody was alone with the ceiling tiles. March 2021. Everything was still strange. Masks, face shields, the little plastic sign-in tablet at the front desk. Half the rooms were closed off because families could finally visit again, and staff didn't want strangers walking past. I got assigned to room 14 pretty quickly. The nurses said the woman inside didn't have anyone, no family in her file, just an emergency contact from a rental office in Chula Vista that never picked up. Doreen was 81, according to the whiteboard. Lung cancer, stage 4, moved to comfort care about 10 days before I met her. She was small under the blanket, small in a way that always surprises you the first time. Her hair was still dyed a soft copper, roots grown out to gray. She wore a thin gold chain with nothing on it, just the chain, resting flat on her collarbone. The first 2 weeks, she barely spoke. She'd ask for water, ask what day it was, thank me for reading. I brought a copy of The House on Mango Street because it was short and someone told me she'd worked in a school library once. She listened with her eyes closed and would sometimes smile at parts I didn't think were smiling parts. Then, on a Wednesday, the 10th of March, I came in around 3 in the afternoon and she was talking to the corner of the room. Talking, not muttering, not the confused word salad you sometimes hear at that stage. It was a real conversation, one side of one, and she was answering someone. Her voice was steady. She paused like she was letting the other person finish, then responded. Sometimes she laughed a small, dry laugh. Sometimes she said what sounded like a name, the same name a few times, though I couldn't hold on to the sounds long enough to repeat them. I stood there with the plastic cup in my hand. I remember the ice chips because I remember watching the top one slide off the pile and hit the floor, and I didn't bend down to get it. The words weren't English. They weren't Spanish either, and San Diego, I hear Spanish every day. They weren't any of the Filipino languages, and half our nurses were Filipino, so I knew what those sounded like. There were sounds in it I didn't have a mouth for, a soft clicking behind the teeth, a vowel that started high and dropped in the middle like it was falling downstairs. I said, "Doreen?" She didn't turn her head. She kept going for another 20 seconds, finished a sentence, and only then looked at me. Her eyes focused slow, like coming up from deep water. "Oh," she said, in her normal, thin voice. "I didn't hear you come in. Was somebody in here with you?" She smiled at me, the way old ladies smile at kids who ask them if they need help crossing the street. "No, honey, just me." I asked Priya, one of the nurses, if Doreen spoke another language. She said no. Chart said English only, born in Ohio. I told her Doreen had probably just talked in her sleep. Priya gave me a look, but didn't push it. That night at home, I couldn't stop thinking about the sound of it, the falling vowel. So I decided next time, if it happened again, I'd record it. Not for anything weird, just to play it back and figure out what I'd actually heard. It happened again the next Monday. I came in with a fresh water pitcher and she was already going, facing the same corner. The blinds were half open, and there was a strip of afternoon light cutting across the foot of her bed, dust in it. I set the pitcher down quietly. I took my phone out of my pocket, opened the voice memo app, and pressed record. I held the phone at my hip. She spoke for 4 minutes and 11 seconds. I know because I've looked at that number since. The cadence changed a couple of times. Once she seemed to be explaining something, patient and slow. Once she seemed to be arguing, softly, the way you argue with a child who's tired. Near the end, she said one long sentence, and then went quiet and closed her eyes. And I thought she'd fallen asleep, so I stopped the recording. She opened her eyes and looked right at me. "Are you real?" she asked. I said yes. She thought about that for a while. Then she said, "Good, he isn't." I asked who. She only shook her head, small. She said her throat hurt. And could I put on the TV, something with people talking? I put on a cooking show. I sat there another 40 minutes until her breathing evened out. In my car in the parking lot, I played the recording. On the small speaker, it sounded even stranger than it had in the room. There was almost a rhythm to it, like she was slipping in and out of something metered. My phone said the file was 411. My hands were cold in the way hands get cold when the rest of you doesn't know it yet. I went back on Thursday. I brought the phone with the file queued up because I thought, honestly, maybe she'd hear it and go, "Oh, that's my grandmother's church language. I haven't heard it since I was a girl." Some simple answer. She was awake and lucid. She recognized me. She asked about the book. I sat next to the bed and said, "Doreen, I want to play you something. Is that okay?" She said, "Sure." I pressed play and held the phone maybe a foot from her ear. Her face did something I've thought about a lot. It didn't go pale. It didn't get scared right away. It went blank, in a very specific way, like a screen that's been switched off, but you can still see the ghost of the last image. She listened for about 15 seconds. Then she reached out and put her hand over mine, over the phone, and pressed until I stopped it. "Who is that woman?" she said. I said, "That's you, Monday afternoon. You were talking to someone in the corner." She shook her head, not upset, just certain. "That isn't me. I don't sound like that. And I don't know those words." I said, "I recorded it right here. I was standing where I am now." She looked at the corner she'd been talking to. She looked back at me. Her hand was still on mine, and her hand was so light, all bone and loose skin, and she said, very quietly, "Please don't play that in here again." I didn't. I put the phone away. She died the following Tuesday, early morning, before my shift. Priya told me at the front desk. She said Doreen had been peaceful, and I said good. And I signed out and drove home and sat in my apartment for a long time, not doing anything. I should have deleted the file then. I know that. But I'd started thinking of it as the last thing I had from her, which is a stupid thing to think about a recording of a language you don't understand. I tried a couple of translation apps. Nothing. I sent a 15-second clip to a friend who studied Slavic languages in college. She wrote back, "That's not any Slavic language I've ever heard. Where did you get this?" I didn't answer. I made an account on a linguistics forum I won't name. I uploaded a 30-second sample and asked, very neutral, if anyone recognized the phonology. Said it was from an elderly relative with dementia, and I was curious. The thread got maybe 8 replies over 2 days. Guesses, mostly. Someone thought Basque. Someone else said glossolalia. One person wrote that the vowel shifts were inconsistent with any natural language family he knew, but the syntax felt regular, which was odd. Then I got 2 private messages, within about an hour of each other. The first was from a user with a long handle and a profile picture of a bookshelf. 3 lines. He said he recognized what he was hearing. He'd heard a recording like it once before, years ago, from a colleague who worked with terminal patients in a hospital in Marseille. He wasn't going to tell me what he thought it was, because saying it wouldn't help me. He asked me, please, to take the file down. The second was from an account made the same day it messaged me. No profile picture, no post history. It said, delete the audio, delete the post, do not save a copy. I am asking as a favor. That was the whole message. I sat with my laptop on the kitchen counter for a long time. I could hear my neighbor upstairs walking around in socks. I could hear a car alarm 2 streets over start and stop and start again. I deleted the post. I deleted the private messages. I deleted the voice memo from my phone, then from the trash folder in the app, then from iCloud in the browser. I didn't tell anyone. I stopped volunteering that summer. I told the coordinator it was because of a new job. That was true. It wasn't the reason. I still drive past that building sometimes when I take the 8 West. Cream-colored, low, easy to miss. I don't say her name out loud anymore. I'm not sure when I stopped. I just did, and it stuck. The first time the count came up short, I chalked it up to my own tiredness. It was late January, cold as hell in Indianapolis that week, and I'd been at the warehouse since 8 the night before. When I recounted the cage inventory at 4 in the morning and got the same short number, I still wrote it off. Inventory glitches happen. Somebody miscodes a return. Somebody's fat-fingered the receiving sheet. It's a big place. The warehouse sits off Girls' School Road on the west side, close enough to the airport that you can hear the cargo planes at 3 in the morning if you're outside on a smoke break. It's one of those beige rectangles that look like nothing from the outside and have $30 million of product inside. Pharmaceutical distribution. Everything from cheap generics on open pallets up to a locked cage in the back with the controlled substances, temp monitored, camera on the door, log sheet on a clipboard that hadn't changed since the 90s. I'd been on nights for almost 2 years, 8 to 6, 4 on and 3 off. Most of the shift is just quiet. You move a lot on foot, you drink a lot of coffee, and you know every squeak and hum in the building because there's nobody else there. There were 3 of us most nights. Me, a guy named Ray who was the shift lead, and a picker we called Bird because he was thin and hunched and always eating sunflower seeds out of a bag. Ray was the one with the cage keys. Bird and I didn't go in there. Company policy. 2-person rule, camera, log. The short count wasn't in the cage the first time. It was in a staging area outside it, on the receiving side, on a pallet that had come in that afternoon and hadn't been fully broken down yet. I was doing the cycle count, comparing the packing slip to the physical boxes, and one of the cartons on the top row was lighter than it should have been. When I opened it, 4 vials were missing out of a tray of 24. Fentanyl citrate, anesthesia stock. The label was the standard blue and white, and the tray had the little foam cutouts where the vials sit. 4 empty holes. I flagged it in the system as a receiving discrepancy and moved on. Happens. Broken in transit. Sometimes the driver sees a busted vial and pulls it. Sometimes the manufacturer shorts you and you catch it on this end. There's a whole paperwork trail for it. 2 weeks later, same SKU, different lot, different pallet. 6 vials missing out of a tray. Different receiving date, different driver. I flagged it again. Ray signed off on my exception report without looking up. That's when I started paying attention. The thing about that job is you get bored. And when you're bored on nights, you start noticing patterns. The shortages were always on the same 3 SKUs. Always fentanyl, always in the injectable form, always in trays where 4 to 8 vials would be gone. Never a whole box, never a whole case. Small enough numbers that on any given shipment, if you weren't looking, you'd write it off as breakage or a manufacturer error. I started keeping my own log, not on paper. I'd take a photo of the packing slip with my phone before I broke a pallet down, and another photo of the tray if it came up short. I told myself I just wanted to catch a bad driver. That was true, at first. Over about 6 weeks, I had photos of 11 separate shortages. Every one of them fentanyl. Every one of them under 10 vials. When I ran the math one Tuesday morning after shift, sitting in my car in the parking lot with the heat on, I got a number that made me sit still for a while. If I extrapolated back to when I'd first noticed, and forward through what I hadn't caught, we were talking about hundreds of vials. Enough to matter. More than enough. The other thing that bothered me was the paperwork. The vials were missing, fine, but the exception reports I'd filed weren't showing up in the monthly reconciliation summary the way they should. When I pulled the summary in the system, the totals matched the manifests. Somewhere between my exception report and the monthly roll-up, the numbers were getting cleaned. I didn't know who was cleaning them. Could have been Ray. Could have been the inventory manager who I saw for maybe 5 minutes a week when our shifts overlapped. Could have been someone in accounting I'd never met. Could have been more than one person. I didn't know, and I couldn't figure out a safe way to find out. So I didn't tell anyone at work. I want to be clear about something. I wasn't playing detective. I wasn't sitting there feeling brave. I was sitting there thinking about the fact that this drug, in the amounts I was seeing walk out, was not going to a hospital. It was going somewhere else. And whoever was moving it had been doing it long enough and carefully enough that it was working. That's not the kind of operation you interrupt by knocking on your supervisor's office door. I looked up how to report it. The DEA has a tip line, and they also have a form on their website. I did neither. I called their local field office during the day from a coffee shop off 465, and I asked what the process was for a warehouse employee to submit documentation about suspected diversion. The woman on the phone was polite and quick. She gave me an email address and told me to include everything I had, in whatever format, and that someone would follow up. I spent a whole Saturday putting the packet together. Photos of the packing slips, photos of the trays, my exception reports, printed from the employee portal, screenshots of the monthly reconciliation summaries where my exceptions had disappeared, dates, lot numbers, shipment IDs. I wrote a cover letter, 2 pages, plain English, no speculation about who was doing it, just what I saw and when I saw it. I sent it Sunday night from my home computer. Then I went to work Monday and did my shift like nothing was different. That part was harder than I thought it would be. Not because I was scared of Ray, exactly. Ray had never been anything but fine to me. He brought in donuts on Fridays. He talked about his kids' basketball team. He'd probably worked at that warehouse for 15 years. Whether he was in on it or just a guy who signed reports without reading them, I couldn't say. I still can't. But I'd sit there at 3 in the morning listening to him whistle in the next aisle, and I'd think about the vials, and it was strange. 3 weeks passed. I did my inventory counts. I flagged 2 more shortages, because to stop flagging them would have been the thing that looked off. Ray signed them without comment. On a Thursday afternoon, I was asleep in my apartment when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. The man on the other end said he was with the DEA, and asked if I could come in the next morning to give a formal statement. I said yes. I gave the statement in a conference room in the federal building downtown. 2 agents, a court reporter, a lawyer they'd offered me who I'd said I didn't need. I walked them through the timeline the same way I'd written it in the cover letter. They asked good questions. They didn't tell me anything about what they'd found or who they were looking at. That wasn't for me to know. The raid happened on a Tuesday, mid-shift, around 1 in the morning. I heard the doors before I saw anyone. Ray was in the office. Bird was in the back on a forklift. When the agents came through the loading bay in vests, I put my hands where they could see them and stood by the pallet I was working on. And one of them nodded at me and kept walking. I don't know if the nod meant anything or if I imagined it. They took Ray out in cuffs. They took the inventory manager out of his house that same night, I found out later. There were 2 other names I didn't recognize. A driver, somebody at a clinic on the east side that was buying the vials through a Shell distributor. I stayed on until the investigation wrapped, which took a few more months. The company brought in new management for the cage. New audit procedures, cameras that actually got watched. I gave 1 more interview, this time on the record for the case file, and after the plea deals came through and the last court date was on the calendar, I put in my notice. Found another job pretty fast. Different industry. Logistics, but nothing regulated. I don't miss the cage. The thing is, the drug is still out there. Not that specific batch, obviously, but the same molecule, the same little glass vials, moving the same way through gaps in paperwork that other people are or aren't catching. I read a story last month about a bust in Ohio, same SKU family, and I recognized the lot number format in the photo they ran with the article. Probably a coincidence, probably not the same source. I don't really know. I read those stories now the way you read about a car accident on a road you used to drive every day. Something in you keeps count.